Got two superstars, Adrienne Batra from The Sun, editor. LeDrew is Mr. Everything, mayoralty candidate, TV personality, was my law partner. Question for Stephen LeDrew.
As a political commentator, you have parted ways with CB24 in violation of CTV News policy and code of conduct. Do you believe this was because, as the Star notes, your commentary on the LGBTQ community, or the mere fact that you had appeared as a guest on the Fox, CB24's competitor?
Good question, and neither answer is accurate. First of all, the Star column, there was one Star article the day after I was fired, and it was 100% inaccurate. It said I was fired because of what I had said, and I phoned the editor of the Star, Michael Cook, and I said, you know, no one called me, no fact checkers, you put this article out there, people are talking about now, it's 100% inaccurate. He had another reporter call me, and they changed the story within 2 or 3 hours. Unlike The Sun, which got the story right, and that's just not buttering her up, but it's actually accurate. They got the story right. That story is entirely wrong. Not once during any of my discussions when they were suspending me, firing me, trying to fire me, did anything of content come up about Fox. And I was fired because a woman who runs CB24 doesn't like certain people, and she hasn't liked me for years. She doesn't like Adrienne Batra. She said after the first time I had Adrienne on, she said, never have that woman on again. And I said, why not? I don't like her. I had Ralph Lean on. Never have that man again. I don't like him.
They would agree. They would agree with you.
I had Patrick Gossage on one day. He was Pierre Trudeau's press secretary. I had him on talking about Justin. What better person to have talking about Justin in the press than someone who had been his father's press secretary? She came after, she said, never have him on again. I said, why not? I don't like him. That's the woman she is. So she doesn't like me. She's tried to fire me for years. And I gave her a reason to fire me by going on to Fox. Actually, I was suspended for that. And then when I made fun of her decision, saying that, you know, she said they're our competition. And I just said, give me a break. No one's going to believe that Fox and CP24 is competition. And so then they fired me for supposedly bringing their name into disrepute. So I do things for the National Post now. I just got an invitation to do things for the Sun. So we'll be on doing videos together. So it's interesting, though, that it's entirely inaccurate.
As former press secretary for Rob Ford, you were known at City Hall as one of the few people Mayor Ford trusted. His brother, Doug Ford, is now the new Ontario PC leader and currently running up against the Liberal Party in this provincial election. Do you have any intentions of contributing to Doug Ford's campaign in this upcoming election? And do you believe that Doug Ford is the appropriate candidate for the Conservatives as he prepares to go up against Kathleen Wynne and the Liberal Party?
Excellent questions, Andrew. Thank you very much. So, for starters, let me dispel any rumors. There's a Rob Ford movie coming out. No one's playing me. I'm not a character. So just so we're clear.
Oh, you are a character.
No one could possibly play me. Really good questions, because the PC Party of Ontario went through so much drama. I'm assuming many of you followed it, and if you didn't, it was fantastic political theater for about a month and a half. I know the Fords very well. God rest Rob's soul. I know Doug very well. I will not second guess PC Party members who made the decision ultimately to make him their leader. That was their choice. And as far as any role I have, nothing. I will not be playing any direct role in that campaign because I'm not part of the campaign team. I learned many years ago when I became a member of the media that it's far funner to kick than be kicked. So I'm happy to be on this side of the microphone. Here's what I will be very candid about, however, is I am a small C Conservative newspaper. I do want to, and we want to see change in this province. And and Doug Ford, I'm very comfortable saying this, will get the endorsement from the Toronto Sun.
My question is particularly for Mr. LeDrew. So you were the second prominent Canadian media personality to face censorship. Facing censure is somewhat a blow to our freedom of speech guaranteed by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. I know you would agree. I think the newest form of censorship today is the widespread phenomena of political correctness. So recently, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau drew some backlash after he told a woman to use the word people kind instead of the word mankind. The Liberal government's agenda to be as inclusive as possible in the power dynamics of gender is somewhat imposing. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I did a video you can still get on the National Post on the digital edition, talking about Trudeau and political correctness, and I refer to when he said people kind, not mankind. The woman was just asking a question, and he interrupted her and said that. And then when he was getting castigated later on, he said, well, I was just joking. Look at the video. He was not joking. He was lying afterwards, trying to make it into a joke. He was lying. I mean, that's the prime minister we have. I have a friend from Poland who told me 3 weeks ago, I came from Poland, he said, to Canada because I thought it was a land of freedom. And you can't say what you want to say in Poland. And now here in Canada, we are being told what you can and cannot say. The government's handing out grants for summer employment. And unless you have certain beliefs, you can't get those grants. So Trudeau is not liberal. He's very, I think he's a poor leader. And I think that we are going down the wrong path of political correctness. One of the reasons I was fired, because of freedom of speech. It's not what I said, it's the fact that they said I can't go on Fox News. And that's a small aspect of it, but I mean, our news, and that's why it's important to have valiant news in this country. Our news is getting torched. Speak to Patrick Brown on what happened to him at the hands of CTV News. Speak to Paul Bliss. We have a lot of people who are losing their jobs and losing their reputations. They are being judged before all the evidence comes out. I don't know what the evidence is in those cases, but I know that the news got torqued because CTV News wanted to make big headlines out of it. And so I think there is a big issue. You put your finger on a big issue, and we need to be careful of guarding freedom of speech.
I'm sure most of you are familiar with the name Dr. Jordan Peterson, or at least you are now. He is certainly someone who has been at the forefront with respect to this, and agree or disagree with how he got there. He's been, I think, one of the most articulate champions for pointing out, frankly, a lot of hypocrisy that is happening with respect to political correctness, and that's often, you get reaction to that. People react adversely when they're being dictated to as to what they cannot say, should or should not say. And so you see this sort of cesspool of people who will castigate you for saying something that may not be acceptable in their view, when it's perfectly acceptable in the general view. And it's a problem. I would only say, because I happen to be the editor-in-chief, my paper is a good bastion for those that don't feel they need to be politically correct. So it's a good place.
Hi, Mrs. Batra.
Hi.
You were previously a press secretary for a controversial political figure, the late Rob Ford. What professional insight do you have to give the class on Trump's press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and his previous press secretary, Sean Spicer? What do you think the most difficult part of their job is that the public may not anticipate?
Saturday Night Live.
Really good question. I'm glad you bring that up, Ralph, because I think that Ms. Huckabee Sanders has been unfairly excoriated because she's a woman. No one can empathize with those two better than I can. The challenge is when you are working for someone who is controversial, and someone who may not necessarily be familiar with the truth. Yes, they choose to stand there and they choose to keep those jobs. You are often only as good as the information that you're given. And in the role of a press secretary, communications director, or whatever it may be, but in particular with respect to those two, it's literally the hardest job in the world. And again, working for someone like President Trump, who likes to give truthiness, as President Bush once said, truthiness, it makes their job even just that much more challenging. And look, the media is very, very much decided that this is a presidency that they are going to bring down no matter what, come hell or high water. Now,
you can't say the media,
Mr.
everybody.
Well, let me finish. Mr. Trump is helping them along the way. So, I mean, I don't envy them. I've been in that position. It sucks. But if you can gamely argue enough with the media to try to get your point across, and at the very least get one part of your messaging to the American people, then you get some success. But the problem is there's too much noise.
Let's have a little accuracy. You said the media is trying to bring down Trump.
Oh, sure.
What about Sean Hannity? What about Fox News? All the time. They are trying to bring down Trump. Sean Hannity is a disgrace to anybody on TV. The way he
I don't watch him. I'm
Well,
sort of
I
surprised
watch
you do.
all news because, you know, I want to see what they're all saying. And the other day he's coming on saying Mueller was from a criminal family. I mean, that guy is absolutely out to lunch.
Well, that's unconscionable, and that's just stupid. And
Well,
I mean,
but
that's
all
up
the media
to.
is not taking down Trump.
Well, there is a very
So do you want to correct
large.
what you said?
Nope, I'm not going to correct.
Well,
what
you
I
said all the
There's
media, and that's not true.
Well, there's a lot of people
Oh,
in the
so you are
media.
correcting.
There's a lot. This coming from the guy, right? Yeah.
How you dealt with the CP24 attempt in restricting your future endeavors. It did not discourage you to speak your mind thereafter. You articulated that the reason that you were founded were simply because you appeared as a guest on the Fox network and was ridiculous and baloney. Furthermore, CP24 appeared to be selfish in wanting you all to themselves. You later reappeared on Fox News to address the backlash. As the market evolves, many will want to exhaust different career paths and embark on new opportunities. How can one become equipped to remain in full control of their career, given that it's apparent that remaining in a company for more than 20 years is no longer the norm, as we are transitioning to a gig economy?
I've been blessed with a bit of a unique circumstance. I've sought out opportunities, but I started off very traditionally. I was a lawyer. I was Ralph Lean's partner at the start of my career, and then later on, we ended up in the same big law firm. But I wasn't just going to practice law, so I sought out other opportunities through politics, and then through media. And then when the law got really boring in one aspect, and I didn't, you know, my kids were grown up, so I didn't have to have gobs of money to pay for university and all the stuff that you guys pay for now. I sought out other opportunities. But I think that the idea that someone starts in a career when they're 24 and they stay in that career for their whole life is over. I just think that, and if you try to do that, you're going to get into a real backwater. So I think that it's terrific to have the education when you start out. Don't think you're going to stay there forever. Also, prepared to be re-educated. And because I think now people have 3 or 4 or 5 careers and they mold into each other, but always be on the outlook for it, because the other thing is that in this changing economy and with the different technology, you won't be able to stay in a career for your whole life. So you're going to have to move. We may find Adrienne on the operating table in a few years, and she's Dr. Batra. I don't know what's going to be by me. I just think that everybody here has tremendous opportunities, but make sure that you are always looking for new ones and sort of borrowing on what you've done in the past and try and leapfrog that ahead into something else. And then you'll end up being fired by a TV station. Well, you wouldn't. I would.
So I started in politics mostly at the provincial level, back home in Saskatchewan. And then I shifted from being in politics to being in advocacy. I worked for an organization called the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which is a taxpayer advocacy group. And through that, and I was the Manitoba director for like 7 years. And yes, I spent 7 years in the Army as well. And I do know how to drive a tank, which is pretty cool. So I did the taxpayer advocacy role because I really, really loved it. I loved the work that I did, and sort of an equal opportunity flamethrower. It didn't matter what political stripe the government was. You kind of can kick the shit out of all of them. And it was a lot of fun. But through that role, I did a lot of media. So I was, writing columns, and I was doing commentary and things like that. And so when I moved to Ontario 10 years ago, when I moved to Toronto, worked for Rob Ford, and then Mayor Ford, and then through complete randomness and happenstance, I got hired at the Toronto Sun, and it was a very fortunate and lucky opportunity for me, and I snapped it up in a heartbeat, and then I got to know my good friend Stephen LeDrew, because he would bring me on his show to be a talking head when he was allowed to, and
when I wasn't allowed to, but I fought for it because he's really good at it. Thank
you. But that is the reality. I mean, I'm in a position now as the editor-in-chief of a newspaper who's been Ubered, ostensibly by the internet, and we weren't ready for that. Still aren't ready for that, frankly. It's a different world. and to Stephen's point, that with respect to technology and things like that, sort of disrupting so many different industries, that's our current reality. And I guess sort of more broadly on a public policy related issue with respect to that, I worry about sort of, we have aging populations, but people that are still in the workforce, and we're not ready. We're not governments aren't ready, healthcare systems aren't ready for all of these people to be using, the system, but also before they retire. You're going to see a lot of people pushed out because of changes to how we produce technology. The dollar store is putting in those bots, and I mean everything is just changing, and I don't think we're ready for it. But all of you in this room, are afforded an opportunity to sort of be ahead of that curve and know what's coming. A lot of people don't have that.
So as technology advances, traditional media platforms such as print, television, and radio are under pressure from digital platforms for news and media. A rising concern is the possible end of Canadian culture in the media, as Canadian legislation protects and encourages Canadian content. As a news broadcaster, have you ever felt pressured by digital platforms, and do you think that digital content would mean less Canadian content in the media?
Then that arises out of the study which was attached. Ralph, you had it. I guess you've all read it. I read that study, and it just showed how little parliamentarians know about the business and what's going on and what's happening. I think that print and TV. I mean, it was 2 years ago, not in a different classroom, but in Ralph's class, and we asked how many people read newspapers, how many people watched TV news, and hardly anybody did. But everybody watches their TV shows, but people watch the shows not on TV. And so part of it, the news has to adapt. And I think that's what I'm doing with the National Post, and that's what Adrienne's doing with the Sun, is that I think a number of people want to have like a 2-minute on your phone, find out what's going on. What are the big news stories of the day? What's the interview of the day? What's the hot interview of the day? So you're knowledgeable about what was going on. But you're not going to necessarily buy a newspaper. You're not going to sit down at 10 o'clock. The latest figures out for CBC National, which years ago, millions of people across Canada would watch every night. They sit down at 10 o'clock, or they come in from their farm and watch the TV at 10, or off from their ports and watch at 11. Now there's 200,000 people from coast to coast to coast. That's it. Watch the CBC National News. They don't just sit down anymore at 10 o'clock and dedicate an hour to it. Why? You're too busy. But to watch on your phone 2 minutes of the top story of the day is something that we're experimenting with. So I think that also goes to your point about Canadian culture and Canadian content. I think people are interested. I don't think it's necessarily you have to regulate it. I think that has been the case in the past, but that was a very different culture and very different technology. And I think that everybody in this room, they know that wherever you have lived before, you're in Toronto now, you may be moving somewhere else, many of you will be, but you're still going to need to know what's going on in Canada. Whether you have loans here, family here, property here, jobs here, you're going to want to know what's going on in Canada. So Canadian culture, per se, for news, is not necessary to have the government in there. As far as Canadian culture as entertainment, you know what? I just think that there's great entertainment all around, and Canadians are up for it. So again, the race goes to the swiftest on that one.
We see shrinking newsrooms constantly. And because of that, advertising revenue is going down. And if I lose an advertiser, then I have to fire a journalist. I mean, that's the dollars and cents of it. But as far as the CanCon goes, people still want to know what's going on in their backyards. People still want to be informed enough of what's happening in their own community. So I think that will always be there. If you live in a larger community, a larger center, you're going to likely get better service with respect to getting news coverage. It's smaller communities that are suffering a lot because a lot of the newspapers, for example, have shut down, and a lot of the local TV stations have shut down, and everything's sort of being centralized. Like in the TV world, for example, they'll do the show out of Toronto, but they'll do like a Saskatchewan package and a Manitoba package and then a Vancouver, and they sort of piecemeal it out, but it's all centralized. So a lot of journalists are out of job. We have to adapt. And as Stephen had said, I know that everything I put in print will go online and more, but everything has to be able to be accessible literally at the palm of your hand. And we all know that now. And we are adjusting and, as I said, adapting to that reality. We, at the Toronto Sun, for example, like we do these videos that Stephen's been talking about. We put it on our Facebook, we put it on our, we tweet it, we Facebook it, we Instagram it, and now we have a YouTube channel. So, you know, we have opportunities there to garner some more revenue and things like that. But those are our realities right now with respect to how we are trying to adapt to the technology that has, Google's eaten our lunch too. So, I mean, that's really a hard thing.
So prior to your appointment as the editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun in 2015, you also performed the role as Director of Communications in the 2010 Rob Ford mayor campaign. You therefore have a unique perspective from both sides of the relationship between politicians and media outlets. Can you comment on how much influence you believe media coverage can have over the political election results? And do you believe that the bias shown in political media is an issue that needs to be addressed for the fairness of the voting system, or is it a welcome addition to the competition between political parties?
My time with Rob in 2010, I mean, I've done a lot of political campaigns and I've never done anything quite like that. It was absolutely extraordinary. It was a nightmare. It was the best thing I've ever done. And at the same time, you know, you want to like light your hair on fire on a regular basis. But it was great. It was a great experience. Media bias is a reality. I'm biased, and I'm unabashed about my bias. The Star's bias, as we've heard from Stephen, CTV is, CBC is, everyone's biased. And as far as whether or not it interferes or you know, corrupts the democratic system, I don't know. I mean, there's so many opportunities these days for people to get their information that it's not just the traditional, you know, what we call legacy media anymore. And so you're afforded the opportunity to get your sources from all over the place. And fake news is an issue, no question. And that can be problematic, but you know, so stick with more traditional, I think, in that sense, because we are actually properly paid journalists to do our job, and you have editors in order to make sure that it's the right stories and things like that. But if the media gets onto something, like there is a collective mentality, like in a press gallery, for example. You know, one media outlet will be on this story, and then everyone, sometimes there's a pack mentality, and they all follow the same bloody story, even if it's not the story of the day or whatever, you know, the hot topic of the day. You know, you feel you're compelled to follow it and chase it. Sometimes that's so fundamentally problematic because then you're missing all the other stuff that's happening over here. So. Bias, absolutely. Does it hurt? I don't know. I think that's sometimes often overstated.
If you know that the Star is going to say anything positive about the Liberals and the Sun's going to say anything positive about the Conservatives, and if they use fake news, which they don't, generally, Star did with me, but that was they were just wrong, and that's why social media is problematic, because you have someone one day was talking. They said, well, this was years ago, Gordon Lightfoot was dead. He phoned in to CB24. He said, you know, I've been reading that I'm dead, and I'm very much alive. But that was social media news, and that's the problem that, you know, we're trying to challenge with the Sun and with the and with the Post, is to have good news. You can disagree with it, but it's got to be factual, and that's what's got to get out there instead of the baloney that passes for news that people believe from social media, because most of it. Or I don't know, I can't say most of it. A lot of it is just not accurate.
Twitter kills off a lot of celebrities all the time.
Well, it's just garbage.
So recently, there has been a discovery of major Russian interference in the 2016 United States election. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered a campaign to influence and lower the potential electoral chances of Hillary Clinton and to undermine the U.S. public democratic process. An example of Russian interference is fake news on social media sites. Do you believe there is a chance that there could be interference from another country in a future Canadian election? And how can individuals prevent interference from influencing their votes?
So a lot of the search engines and a lot of these social media sites are already sort of putting up these filters in order for you to be able to push out these bots that are responsible for much of that misinformation. So, we have to work with them in order to be able to do that. How successful would it be in a Canadian election? I mean, I suppose anything's possible. So much of where people get their news these days is actually from their Facebook feed. And we know what the disaster that Facebook's been in the last few weeks and all of that drama that's going on. So it's very hard to necessarily trust any of these sources. But look, fake news has been around forever. That's just a fact. It's often described as news that you just don't necessarily agree with. So that's what you do, is you just call it fake because you don't agree with it. But then there's also stuff that is just absolutely, completely made up and is nonsense and BS. But I don't know. I feel quite confident in our electoral system that we wouldn't be manipulated like that, only because it is so much in the zeitgeist now. It's so much in the ether of what we're talking about and what we're discussing. I think that there's always chance for some semblance of fraud, but not on a large scale.
The electoral system has very little to do with it. I mean, what they're talking about in the States, no one changed their vote because they thought that Russia or Putin say, oh, vote this way. It was all the news. And it's, as Adrienne said, it's the social network news. Much of it is factually incorrect. So it comes back to the fact where you get your sources from. You want to be an informed person, you want to be an intelligent person, you want to be a smart person, then you have to look at the source of your news. And if it's Twitter, it's just someone spouting off, you might as well just go down to the local coffee shop, the local bar, and ask somebody for the facts and get a bunch of baloney. That's exactly what Twitter is, and Facebook and a lot of stuff. So that's what we're trying to cut through again, to have if you may disagree with it, but to have the right facts out there and then make your own informed decision. And that's got to come from an established and a trustworthy news organization.
Hello, we would first like to congratulate you on serving in the Canadian Armed Forces, obtaining the rank of lieutenant, and receiving your nomination for a YWCA Woman of Distinction Award. One of our ongoing themes in this speaker series is the discrimination of women from traditionally male-dominated professions. In receiving your rank as lieutenant, what forms of gender discrimination or bias did you face, and how did you overcome those challenges? Do you believe that there has been adequate push towards gender equality within the Canadian Armed Forces? Why or why not?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your comment. I don't know. I got asked this a lot. I served in 1991, from 91 to 97, 98. So I was 17 when I joined. It was a long time ago. Oh my God, almost 30 years ago. Holy shit. And I don't know, I think I know I should have this great story about, oh, I overcame this adversity and I was this and this. I didn't really genuinely have that experience. I was very fortunate. And yes, I've been in predominantly male-dominated in environments, and not a lot of, short brown girls joining the Army from Saskatchewan. I was very fortunate. I had incredible mentors who were mostly white males. I mean, that was the industry in which I was in. And it's not dissimilar for me in media either, and frankly in politics. But if there was, and I'm not much of a pushover, as you can probably tell.
What a surprise.
So I often, I'll speak up for myself, and I'll stand up for myself, and I kind of call people out if they were to do those sorts of things. A number of things have happened over the course of the last number of years with a number of our paramilitary organizations, including the RCMP, including the Canadian Forces, an organization that I feel very closely and near and dear to my heart, and I respect and admire immensely, and also defend a lot. There has been, the suggestion that it's just this hotbed of sexism and rape and misogyny and all these things. It's changing. That's the reality, because as more and more women, for example, are choosing to go into the CAF, it's inevitable that will change. And here's what I will also say, ladies. It's not always the men that are going to drag you down or push you down. It's sometimes the women too. Often they feel that there's only enough room around the table for a certain amount of you, and they're not very supportive either. And it's in any organization's best interest to ensure that everybody is successful because that helps them. And you know, I have a number of friends that are still serving in the military. Many of them are women and female and officers. One of which just served. She did 3 tours in Afghanistan, and a report came out about how horrible the Canadian Forces is, and she's like, you have to defend us. She's like, this is not the organization that I grew up with, or that I know, or that I exist in. So yes, I think it's not dissimilar to any civilian organization with respect to their issues with sexual harassment, sexual assault, and things like that. And I think that there is such a fundamental shift with General Vance, who's the Chief of Defense Staff. He has made an absolute point of ensuring that this is an organization. He wants to be reflective of, you know, Canadian society and who we are and our values. And I think that will change. And it will change when there's institutional change at the top of the rank system, of the military ranking system. And we're going in the right direction, is what I would say.
Mrs. Batra, many news outlets utilize of softwares that make articles recommendations for readers based on what the individual is currently reading or has read. Depending on how the algorithm is written, these types of recommendations may sway and limit the perspective of certain individuals. During one of our past interviews, Mrs. Heather Conway briefly touched on the fact that CBC has pledged to alter their software in a manner that it does not simply feed articles of the same perspective to individuals. What are your thoughts on the matter, and does the Toronto Sun follow a similar approach?
So it's a really good question, actually, and it's constantly evolving, because for many of the social media sites that actually push out, like they aggregate our content and push it out, they change the algorithm, actually, which is very frustrating for us. We're trying to constantly keep up. Even something as simple as putting up an SEO headline. You know, you get your sort of keywords and key searches because you want, like, say people are searching for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. I mean, I want my content, my stories to be sort of at the top of the list. So you have the SEO. But when the technology companies you're working with change that, as far as what we do internally specifically, one of the things that we just have is it's just a running list of everything that is there. So we don't have that recommended for you sort of thing that comes up after. That happens on YouTube channels if you have click to play or automatic play, and it happens in your on your Facebook. But we put everything out. So there's a pretty good chance if you want to read something on the environment, you know, Laurie Goldstein, who's one of the best daily journalists and columnists in the country, happens to be, you know, one of my editors.
He's taught here. He's come to my class. He's great.
He's excellent. You know, you want to read something about climate change or things like that. Laurie writes about that a lot, and he gets a lot of support and a lot of, you know, a lot of fans. The things that he's saying, and a lot of hate as well. You're gonna get all of Laurie's columns, and then you're just going to see, well, what did he write previously? What did he write last week? What did he write there? So it's already there. It's externally, though. It's when the technology companies change their algorithm that it kind of messes with us a little bit.
Mr. LeDrew, you've prepared yourself, and I've noticed that you prepared yourself for the questions about Tucker Carlson and stuff like that. But I want to ask you some more questions that weren't asked already, because you seem to already have kind of rehearsed answers.
I don't rehearse. I just tell the truth.
Whoa, here, this is getting
So
you know when you're telling the truth, it's easy.
Yeah, I hear you. I found Carlson to be particularly aggressive and hostile towards you during the whole interview, and as if you had been the creator of all the terms of the sexual preferences categories. Unlike most people, I disagree with your suspension and your subsequent termination from Bell Media for mocking them. Do you in any way regret taking the interview? If not, what have you learned from that experience with Tucker Carlson, and do you think that that Bell Media infringed upon your rights to free speech?
To your last question, yes, they did. And I have lawyers. I mean, you have to look at your options in that. And many lawyers have said, you know, I can make millions of dollars from suing them. I don't want to sue them. maybe that'll happen. I have another 1.5 year limitation, but you know what? You don't want to be a whiner. You want to just move on. And I moved on with Post Media, but and I have no regrets about going on Tucker Carlson. I knew what was going to happen, and my point was to defend it. Like what? As I said in that first interview, what's his problem with somebody having a label and they find some solace in that? And it's just like, what's it off his? What does it cost you? And he didn't have an answer for that. And the producer afterwards, which is fascinating, because I was in New York, I met the producer. Tucker's in Washington, because he likes to live there. His producer is in New York, and he is from East London, England, and he's gay. He's married to a Filipino man. And I said to them, I met the two of them, I said, how do you deal with Fox? He said, it's no problem. None at all. He said, they're very liberal behind the scenes. He said, all this stuff, Tucker's out there, knocking everybody. And I said, he said he was knocking Canada for this. And he said, you gave it back to him. Like, what is his problem with somebody? It's not divisive. It's not bad for society. It's not a negative aspect for society. It's a positive thing. So I said, you know what? Go for it. Because I knew what I had to do to defend it to that night going on there. So I don't, listen, I've been around a lot. I had to steer Jean Chrétien out of office. He threw the whole government at me afterwards. I had a heart attack. I lost a lot of money. And, you do what you have to do. And I just went on to defend Canada.
How do you feel currently about the youth engagement, both around our age of 20s and then also the teens?
So I think that your youth is most plugged in. They're extraordinarily informed. Because this is the world in which you've grown up in. This is the day and age that there's most of you in this room haven't lived in a world without the internet. I mean, that's incredible. And it's a pretty extraordinary thing. I think what we have done in the newspaper business, for example, in general, maybe in the media in general, is not really acknowledge that or recognize that, because you guys are going to be, spending money, and you're going to be hopefully being able to afford homes and moving on in your careers, and you're going to be consumers of traditional news. But you also want to read stories and talk about things that are going on with you right now. So that's why we try to cover, Facebook story, for example, and give it a lot of rigor and a lot of information.
So this question is for both of you. So recently, the Toronto Police has formally withdrawn its bid to participate in the 2018 Pride Parade. Last year, the Toronto Police were banned from the event after Black Lives Matter activists demanded that uniformed officers no longer participate. Critics say that having uniformed officers participate in the event shows commitment and support to the Toronto Police to members of the LGBTQ2S community. What are your thoughts on the matter?
I think that is, again, it's one of the problems of public engagement these days. Years ago, the LGBTQ community would have been just delighted to have cops in uniform there, and it was a big deal. It was a big, huge success to have cops in uniform there. And now, because of the prejudice of some, and I've taken great issue with a number of people in Black Lives Matter, who in particular are at the forefront of this, and they disrupted the parade last year, and they had the organizers sign something. He was a CEO, I think, wasn't it? And then he got fired later on. I mean, this is really small-minded, petty politics. And if you want to talk about being inclusive, I mean, really, you got to have all organizations there. It's not as though we're having people walking around with AK-47s. This is not a militaristic thing. Police are there to serve and to protect. There are many gays and lesbians and others in the police force. And if they want to go out in their uniform, I think more power to them. And I think it's a short-sightedness of the organizers to ban them there. And you start off by saying the police are withdrawing. Well, they're not withdrawing voluntarily. They're withdrawing because they don't want to have a big battle over this thing. So I think it's unfortunate for public life in Toronto.
The gay community and the police have had, challenges in the past. There were a number of years ago, and you'll have to Google it because you're so young, there were bathhouse raids in the gay village, and that set off a really bad course of the police with the gay community. But a lot of that has been repaired over the years, and it's things like being part of Pride and being out there and showing your colors, so to speak. I found what happened last year. Well, they were bullies. Black Lives Matter bullied that organization into making that decision, and I think it was appalling. But the organizers capitulated. This year, we saw the chief of police, Mark Saunders, withdraw his desire to participate because, again, many in the Pride, the leaders of Pride had suggested that the Toronto police don't deserve to be there because the cops dropped the ball on their investigation with respect to Bruce MacArthur and the gay village. I think that's grossly unfair. And there are many gay police officers who we've heard from, and we ran op-eds from them talking about how they are so proud to be not only a police officer, but also a member of this community. And they're not afforded that opportunity anymore to show their support. And I mean, it's just bad public policy. It's just bad. It's a bad decision. It's a irresponsible decision, and in one I hope over a couple of years will ultimately change, because I know the public doesn't support the ban on cops marching in their uniform.
I want to close by thanking you, and I want you to remember, you guys are out speaking in the media, you're spokesmen. I want you to tell the world how smart Ryerson students are. When they're hiring, I want them hiring Ryerson students. I want to thank you, students, for the year. I hope you've enjoyed it.